A Republican-led committee in the Michigan State Senate is now flat out rejecting the big lie. Officials there released a 55-page report yesterday which debunks false claims by former President Trump and his allies inside and outside the state. They found zero evidence of widespread or systematic fraud in the 2020 election. That's right, zero evidence. This was a Republican-led committee. The report refutes lies about, among other things, dead people voting, unsolicited ballots, voting tabulators being compromised, and more, many of the things you still hear from the former president. Joining me now to discuss, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. It's good to have you back on. As you know, the big lie persists. A recent public poll by Monmouth University found 1 in 3 Americans believe President Biden only won the 2020 election due to voter fraud. Seeing a report like this coming out of a Republican-led committee in the Michigan State Senate that says that's not true, there is no evidence of it, does this move the dial in your state? Does it take the wind out of the sails of the folks still pushing the big lie?
Well, that remains to be seen, because also this week people are still calling for an Arizona-type review or audit of the process, and so the actions that will be taken in furtherance of this report are, still remain to be seen. Because remember, there's several bills, in fact, 39 bills of legislation working their way through the state legislature right now in response to misinformation, trying to codify the big lie in different ways and respond to the massive voter turnout by doing away with policies that led to such high levels of voter engagement last year. So now's the time for Republican legislators to act based on their findings and undo this process of passing pernicious voter suppression legislation that furthers their misinformation that they now have debunked.
As you note, this report, it does urge some of the measures you're talking about. Make absentee voting harder, limit the availability of drop boxes for absentee ballots. I mean, sadly, is the effect in terms of access to voting the same, even though this report debunks the feeling behind it, right? This idea of the big lie.
I think it's important to note there's a three-pronged strategy now in furtherance of those who want to undo democracy. One is furthering the big lie, which this report takes away. But the other two still stand. One is passing the pernicious legislation that's ultimately going to make it harder for people to vote. And the other is changing the authority of election administrators to protect and guard the results of the election to ensure the people's will rules the day. So both of those things are still out there. And as you mentioned, a lot of people are still also believing the misinformation. What's good about this report is that it does come from Republican leaders in the state Senate. And what I hope is that other Republicans in the legislature and around the country will follow this lead and look at the facts, look at the data, and affirm that the results of the election are accurate and move forward based on that so that we can work together and protect democracy.
Some are. We spoke to a Republican official in the state of Kentucky yesterday who made the same point. You saw that in Georgia as well. Trouble is, they're often targeted by people in their own party. I do want to ask you this, given your position, should there be legal consequences for those who continue to lie about this, make baseless public statements attacking the legitimacy of the election? Should there be more than just sort of public shaming, right? But should there be legal consequences for that?
Yes. I mean, one of the reasons why we're now, 7-8 months after the closure of the polls in November and still having this conversation is because there's been no accountability for those bad actors who've spread this misinformation, and there needs to be, because that's actually, as the report says, the type of fraud that is permeating our elections and democracy and needs to be addressed. I've called for deceptive practices legislation that would ban acts that intentionally try to deceive people about their voting rights. And so I think that conversation needs to be had, particularly in light of what we've all experienced and continue to experience around this election misinformation.
Yeah. And one of the people facing no legal consequences for sharing that is the former president, Donald Trump. Continues to do it every day. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.